What really happened to Eddie Aikau began in pitch-black water, 12 miles from land, in the middle of the Molokai Channel. A canoe floated overturned. 6 men clung to its hull. Flares shot into the night. Nobody answered. The radio was already dead, swallowed by the sea. One man grabbed his surfboard and paddled alone into the darkness, racing hypothermia itself. Nobody watching him disappear knew they were watching a legend get made. 9 years earlier, Waimea Bay didn't have a lifeguard. Not because nobody wanted the job, because nobody wanted it badly enough to actually do it. Waimea in winter turns into one of the most dangerous stretches of water on the planet. 30-foot faces, currents that pull grown men under and don't give them back. In 1968, the city and county of Honolulu finally created a lifeguard position covering the entire North Shore, and they needed somebody who could paddle into that water on the worst days of the year and pull a stranger out alive. They hired a 22-year-old named Eddie Aikau. Edward Rion Makuahanai Aikau was born in 1946 in Kahului, Maui, the third of 6 children born to Solomon and Henrietta Aikau. The family traced its lineage back to the Kahuna Nui, the high priests who served King Kamehameha I and Kamehameha II. And if you believe that kind of thing shapes a person, Eddie's entire life reads like it was already written before he learned to walk. The family moved to Oahu when Eddie was 13. By 16, he dropped out of school and gone to work at the Dole pineapple plantation, saving every dollar toward his first real surfboard. By the time Honolulu handed him that lifeguard badge, he already knew Waimea's moods better than most people know their own street. Over the following years, official estimates put the number of swimmers Eddie personally pulled from that water at over 500. Not 500 over a whole career, 500 for one man, one beach, no jet skis, minimal backup for most of it. And here's the detail that still doesn't sit right with people when they hear it for the first time. During his years on that beach, nobody drowned on his watch. Not one person. There's a reason this story is still talked about today, and it isn't just the saving. It's what happened on the days Waimea got so big that everyone else stayed on the sand. By his early 20s, Eddie had already ridden some of the largest waves ever recorded on Oahu's North Shore. And that reputation as a big wave rider ran parallel to his reputation as a lifeguard, each one making the other one bigger. In 1984, organizers created a big wave contest in his honor, one that only runs when the open ocean swell hits at least 20 feet Hawaiian, which translates to wave faces well over 30. That threshold is so demanding the event has only run 11 times since its creation, sometimes going the better part of a decade without a single edition. In the earliest years, conditions were so extreme that organizers stood on the beach arguing about whether to call it off completely. According to people who were there, big wave rider Mark Fu looked at the lineup, looked at the argument, and said the only sentence that mattered: Eddie would go. The contest ran. The phrase spread onto bumper stickers, t-shirts, and eventually into the entire vocabulary of Hawaiian surf culture. Because it wasn't hype. It was a fact about one specific man, said out loud by someone who had actually watched him paddle into water no one else would touch. The event moved to Waimea Bay itself the following year, and has stayed there ever since, drawing crowds estimated at 50,000 people whenever it runs, visible from the highway that cuts along the coast. Winners over the decades include some of the biggest names big wave surfing has ever produced. Kelly Slater has one. Ross Clark Jones has one. Bruce Irons won it with a barrel people still talk about. John Florence won it the same year he claimed his first world title. These are surfers who built entire careers chasing swells, and getting an Eddie win still sits above almost everything else on their resume. There's also a second version of the phrase that surfers use less often but mean just as seriously: Eddie wouldn't tow. It's a jab at jet ski-assisted surfing, at the idea of being whipped into a wave by a machine instead of earning it with your own 2 arms. Whatever you think about that debate, the point behind it is the same point behind everything Eddie ever did in the water. Nothing was given to him. He paddled for it, every single time. In 1978, Eddie signed on to something that had nothing to do with contests or lifeguard towers. The Polynesian Voyaging Society was attempting a 30-day, 2,500-mile crossing to Tahiti aboard a double-hulled canoe called the Hokulea, navigated the same way Polynesians crossed oceans 1,000 years before satellite positioning existed. No instruments, just stars and swells and memory. For Eddie, this wasn't just an adventure, it was personal. He believed in what the voyage meant for Hawaiian identity at a moment when a lot of that identity felt like it was slipping away, and he wanted to be part of proving the old methods still worked. On March 16th, the Hokulea left Honolulu at 6:30 in the evening with 16 crew members aboard, bound for Tahiti. Within hours, one of the hulls started taking on water in rough seas, 30-knot trade winds pushing against 8 to 10-foot swells. By the next morning, roughly 12 miles south of Molokai, the canoe rolled over completely. For a while, the crew actually thought they'd be fine. They clung to the overturned hulls through the night, using strobe lights and whistles to keep organized and keep count of each other, firing flares whenever a plane passed overhead. That didn't last. The planes never saw them. The canoe kept drifting further from the shipping lanes with every hour, and the odds of anyone spotting them were moving in exactly the wrong direction. One crew member already tried paddling for help earlier and turned back, convinced a passing plane had already seen them. It hadn't. That's when Eddie made the call. He'd go for help himself, alone, on his surfboard, aiming for the island of Lanai, more than 15 miles away across open, current-heavy water. Crew member and future master navigator Nainoa Thompson paddled out with him first, just to test the board and read the conditions. Then Eddie went alone. He took his life jacket off before he left. It was slowing his paddling down, and speed was the only thing that mattered now. He was never seen again. Hours later, a Hawaiian Airlines pilot happened to catch the faint glow of the crew's last working flare out of the corner of his eye, and the Coast Guard finally located the overturned Hokulea. The cutter Cape Corwin reached the canoe just after 1 in the morning. All 15 remaining crew members were eventually pulled out alive, brought back to Honolulu cold, exhausted, and grieving before the search for Eddie had even really begun. What followed became one of the largest air and sea searches in Hawaiian history. Coast Guard cutters, Civil Air Patrol planes, private boats, and a civilian helicopter the Aikau family paid for out of pocket all combed the water for a man and a board that had simply vanished into the Pacific. At one point, a civilian helicopter crew reported spotting Eddie's surfboard drifting alone, southwest of where the canoe had gone down. It was the last confirmed sign of him. The family later estimated the search cost them somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 out of pocket, money donated in his name instead of flowers once the family made their next decision. They found nothing else. Not the board again, not any further trace of him. After 6 days, the family gathered the press and made the announcement nobody wants to make. Eddie's father spoke for the family, thanked the Coast Guard, and said, in essence, that continuing to search would only put more searchers at risk for a recovery that wasn't coming. Eddie was 31 years old. Years later, crew member Kiki Hugo put into words what it actually felt like out there in the hours before Eddie left. Hypothermia, exposure, exhaustion, she said. When he paddled away, she genuinely believed he was going to make it, and that the rest of them weren't. That's the trade Eddie made, without anyone asking him to make it. If a story like this is the kind of surf history you actually want more of, hit subscribe now, because we've got a lot more of these deep dives coming on the people who built this sport, not just the ones who ended up on magazine covers. While all of this was hardening into legend, one person in that family had a very different job, living with it, every single day, in public. Eddie's younger brother Clyde had grown up right alongside him, another North Shore lifeguard, another Hokulea crew member on a separate voyage of his own, another man who rode Waimea when it turned into a monster. The two brothers were close in the specific way only two people who've nearly drowned together can be, trading impromptu slack-key guitar sessions with family late into the night, showing up for each other on the worst swells anyone else refused to paddle out on. After Eddie disappeared, Clyde didn't just grieve quietly and move on. He made it his life's work to keep his brother's name attached to something alive, instead of a plaque on a beach nobody visits. In 1986, at the second ever Eddie Aikau Big Wave Invitational, Clyde won it outright. He'd later tell people 2 turtles guided him to that win. And whether you take that literally or as a grieving brother finding meaning where he needed it most, Clyde kept surfing in that event nearly every year it ran, all the way through 2016, when he was 66 years old, competing against surfers young enough to be his grandkids in waves that could kill either one of them equally. Clyde spent decades running the Beach Boy service in Waikiki, mentoring young lifeguards, and fighting through his own share of near misses along the way, including emergency heart surgery in his 70s after collapsing outside a restaurant, an episode that got serious enough that Kelly Slater personally kicked off a fundraiser to help cover his recovery. He kept going anyway. Being an Aikau, it turns out, wasn't a title you inherited once and got to keep quietly. It was something you had to actually do, out loud, in public, every single year for the rest of your life. Now here's the part almost nobody outside Hawaii's surf community fully absorbed this year. In May of 2025, Clyde Aikau died at his home in Waimanalo after a long fight with pancreatic cancer and heart disease. He was 75. Surfers who'd competed alongside him, people like Landon McNamara and Billy Kemper, called it the end of an era, and in a very real sense, it was. For 47 years, there had always been an Aikau brother physically present in the same water Eddie died trying to reach. Now, for the first time since 1978, there wasn't. And then the ocean itself seemed to agree that something had shifted. The Eddie has always run only when Waimea produces sustained 40-foot faces, a bar so demanding the contest has only gone 11 times total since 1985. It ran in back-to-back years, 2023 and 2024, for the first time in decades. And by late 2025, people were openly wondering if a third consecutive year, a genuine three-peat, was actually about to happen. The Bay never delivered. Organizers held the waiting period open all the way to the first week of March 2026, watching forecast after forecast come in just under threshold, before finally confirming what everyone had started to suspect. No Eddie this season. For one of the only times in 11 runnings, and the very first winter since Clyde's passing, the ocean itself chose not to allow the tribute that carries his family's name. But the thing that actually matters more than any single contest is simpler than any of that. The reason people still say Eddie would go isn't about a wave count or a trophy. It's that a 22-year-old kid took a lifeguard job nobody else wanted, on a beach that kills people who underestimate it. And then, when it mattered more than it ever had, paddled toward an island he might never reach, because staying with the boat meant watching people he cared about die slowly instead. That's not a slogan on a bumper sticker. That's just what happened, on one specific morning, to one specific man. His story went on to win an Emmy as an ESPN documentary, got told respectfully on a comedy show about American history, got read into the record on a true crime podcast decades after his disappearance. Because it turns out this particular story refuses to stay contained to surfing. Clyde spent 47 years making sure of that. And even with Clyde gone now, and even in a year the Bay refused to cooperate, the Aikau family, the Eddie Aikau Foundation, and every surfer who paddles out on March 17th for Eddie Aikau Day are still doing exactly what Clyde did, keeping a promise a family made to the ocean and to each other almost 50 years ago. Eddie's board was never found. His body was never found. What was found instead was every single person who came after him and quietly decided that was the standard now. Luke Shepardson, a working North Shore lifeguard, came off his actual shift and won the whole thing in 2023. Landon McNamara, a local kid who grew up hearing this exact story from people who lived it, won it the year after. That's not a coincidence. That's the mantra doing its job, one generation after another, on a beach that hasn't gotten any less dangerous since 1968. That's the part of this story that never needed a 40-foot swell to prove itself, and it's the part that's going to outlast every single one of us watching it right now.